It means that you have to understand how the world has been changing over time to get to a level where you need to be more than what. But again, permit me to share this with you, because the whole of this month, I've also been engaged in talking to different clubs about literacy. And I have called this a literacy diamond. That to consider oneself literate, you've got to just be more than literate and numerate. So I talk of something which I have called conventional literacy, and I'm thinking about that in terms of the ability to read and write, which I've talked about, and the ability to count. Okay. Now, in other geographies, they have another type of literacy, which is a competence, which is competence-based literacy, where you know a craft or a skill, and that is where you in the local speak we talk about vocational skills. I think that rings a bell with you when you talk about being able to make a chair, be a carpenter, be a mason, be a plumber, be a craftsman of different skills. So there are quite a number of skills that are so important in developing a good society. And that's where productivity lies. So conventional literacy is very important. And again, I have been saying that that is why it is very important for the common good to ensure that a lot of our children go to school. And I want to thank Rotarians. One of the Rotarians who spoke before me spoke about that. And in speaking about that, he was talking about the importance of literacy in building a prosperous society, in building a more productive society, in making every member of the community productive. So that is something that should occupy us as Rotarians. How can we, one, teach our people how to read and write, two, how to count, and three, how can we teach people vocational skills? We talk about people not being employed, but you have so many people with degrees and you have so few people with skills. The last time I checked, we are producing about 160,000 managers from our institutions every year. And we are producing about 30,000 technical people. So you want 160,000 managers to manage 30,000 people. So we've got a problem there. What a very big problem. And we've got to reset the pyramid. At the bottom of the pyramid, you want more people with skills and competences, and you need fewer managers. Now, the second aspect of literacy that I think is important to us is cultural literacy. And I've also been talking about this. Historical, we need to have a historical self-awareness. Others would call it cultural wokeness, being aware of who we are. We are losing the ability to speak our languages. We have a very low regard of our heritage. In fact, some others disparage other people's heritage. And I don't know why we as Africans do that. It's very unfortunate, because a people without a civilization, a people without their own civilization do not have a self-identity. So this is a very big problem for us. Where I come from here in central Buganda, when we say Tambulango Muganda, you are trying to show your cultural awareness. And there is scientific value to that, in the sense that if you belong to a certain clan, you would not marry people from your clan. So the idea of dealing with what diseases that are caused by inbreeding has been here with us for a long time. So there's a sense in which culture has always dealt with these issues. So cultural literacy is a very critical area for us, and we should be proud of our cultures. Those peculiarities make us a nation, and they make us a country. And I think those are some of the things we don't think about in terms of literacy. I think that's very important. Now, when you want to talk about progress, I have brought in the idea of scientific literacy. Unfortunately, when I speak about science, a lot of misunderstanding has taken place. People think of pure sciences, but when we talk about science, we have what we call pure sciences, and we have what we call social sciences. Now, science applies across, whether you're talking about social sciences or you are talking about literacy, about pure sciences. And the point here is, how do you know that you know? How do you discover knowledge? What is the nature of knowledge? So the idea of me talking about science here is not to talk about STEM. STEM means science, technology, economics, and mathematics. But I'm really talking about the whole array of what we teach in schools. And I am saying, when you are teaching, you need to understand what we call method. You need to understand what we call scientific method. You need to understand how knowledge is discovered. Even when we are teaching, actually, when we talk about pedagogy, when we talk about approaches to teaching, we talk about the curriculum, and we talk about how that curriculum has embedded theories of learning. So how do we discover knowledge? How do we share knowledge? What knowledge do we share? I don't have the luxury to go into all of these, but since I will be sharing this with Irene so that she can share with you, you can find out really from what we call the philosophy of the social sciences, what these four things mean: ontology, epistemology, logic, and method. But they're really talking about the nature of knowledge, how knowledge is discovered, how we should reason, and the methods for finding knowledge. Now, once you talk about those three literacies, then you need to have a fourth literacy, which I have called contextual literacy. And I have shared all this with the people before. Maybe some of you have been in the other club where I have shared this. So when you talk about contextual literacy, you need to understand where we stand in the bigger scheme of things. There are more than 180 countries in the world. So where do we stand in the bigger scheme of things? Where do we stand in the power dynamics? What is our understanding of world history, and what does that world history mean for us? So this is a universal view of literacy, which I thought is very important to give you a background to the digital literacy, which I am going to talk about in this presentation. So this brings me to how we have moved, and this is taken from a work by Yuval Harari. It's called *Sapiens: A Brief History of Mankind*. And here Harari has recognized three revolutions, three key human revolutions. The cognitive revolution, which took place about 70,000 years ago, and then the agricultural revolution and the scientific revolution. So in the cognitive revolutions, we were hunter-gatherers. We flooded the planet, we created social structures, and we multiplied faster. So if there has been any particular species that has been able to conquer and thrive in the world, it is human beings. Now, that thriving, we moved from being hunter-gatherers to an agricultural revolution, where we moved in communities, became sedentary, and started being farmers. Hariri has argued that he doesn't know if that was a very good thing to happen to human beings, because did it bring happiness? Okay, so there's a new imagined order where you have peasants and you have nobility and you have empires and you have the emergence of gods. Well, some of you have a different idea of gods. Harari has a different idea of what God is all about. But that is all in the agricultural revolution. And that book would make very interesting reading for anybody who wants to be literate. Now, I am not saying you have to believe what Harari has said, and a lot of people have criticized what he has said, but that is how he has viewed the agricultural revolution, that it made us live in settlements. Now, when we began living in settlements, we then began to find new ways of improving agriculture, and therefore we created the scientific revolution. Now, and that science is very important to human progress. It's part of capitalism, and it has grown. A lot of the things that have happened in our lives have happened just in the last 500 years. Before those last 500 years, we lived more or less like animals. We roamed the earth. We gathered the fruits, grew a bit of food, but science has really changed the way things are. And that scientific revolution is what drives mankind today. Will it take us to extinction? But that scientific revolution itself has come in four stages. One, towards the end of the 18th century, we had the steam engine, okay? We invented the steam engine, and the whole problem of mankind was how to move from using human muscle to using machines to produce more. We discovered the steam engine, that is what we call Industry 1. What we call Industry 2 was then the mass production, or we discovered electricity. That is towards the start of the 20th century. So you can see these things are not very, very far away. Now, when we come to the 1970s, you can imagine that is just in the 70s. We discover the computer, we go into automation, okay? And then we go into the fourth revolution, where we are now, fourth industrial revolution, which we call the cyber physical system, or the Internet of Things. When we talk about the Internet of Things, we talk about things being interconnected. Very simple way of me explaining this to you. Look at your phone connected to that timepiece on your hand. Look at your phone being connected to your computer, okay? Now, in more developed societies, your phone can be connected to your house, and when it gets cold, you can switch on the heating in your house. That is already happening in Europe. So when you think about the Internet of Things, you are beginning to talk about what we call smart cities, smart environments. So all these things have happened, and they've not happened a long time ago. Starting in the 1970s, the march of knowledge, the march of literacy, the change in the way of life has been so dramatic, starting from computer automation and what we call machine learning. So machines have learned how to do things. Now we are moving from the fourth industrial revolution to the fifth industrial revolution. But you can look at this. If you look here, I don't know if you can see my cursor. When we had the steam engine, we had physical labor, and we had the idea of learning a skill as literacy. When we moved to the second industrial revolution, we talked about standardization, we talked about certainty. When we moved to the third industrial revolution, we talk about expertise, and we talk about disciplinary STEM. STEM, I have told you, is what we teach in the schools when we talk about science, technology, economics, and mathematics. And I'm trying to disabuse you of the what seems to be a national policy of promoting sciences. It's a misconstrued policy, because science should be a way of life. Whether you want to be a footballer, there's science of being a footballer. Whether you want to be a musician, there's the science of being a musician. So the whole idea of science has been misconstrued. I don't know if they're people from the Ministry of Education, but they should take that message back, that science cuts across arts, it cuts across social sciences, it cuts across pure sciences. And that is a problem we are creating by creating unequal paths to success for people. So in the fourth industrial revolution, we're talking learning agility, adaptability, empathy, and this is where we are. But I have talked about moving into a fifth industrial revolution. So what's going to happen? Here you are talking about a very, very personalized world, what we call Industry 5.0, which is focused on the cooperation between man and machine. So as human intelligence works in harmony with cognitive computer skills, we're talking about things like data analytics, artificial intelligence, and we are putting humans back into industrial production with collaborative robots. So workers need to be upskilled to provide value-added tasks in production, leading to mass customization and personalization for customers. So when we produce products, today it is possible to buy a car which is not necessarily mass produced, but there is a mass production line on which you can program and say, produce for me such and such a very, very specific car. And that is part of machine intelligence, which we are trying to create. And there are concerns. What will that mean when we get to that? But it is already happening in more sophisticated societies, in more societies that have progressed more. And that should worry us. Because now when you come home, you are still talking about very, very basic digital literacy skills. And what are those basic literacy things we are talking about? This is what you asked me to talk about. One, we are still talking about learning critical thinking and evaluation. So when you think about your children, do they learn when they go to school, apart from the cram work? Are they involved in anything that enables them to do critical thinking? Can they have a conversation and say, teacher, you are wrong? We are talking about things like e-safety. We are talking about things like cultural and social understanding. I've already talked about that. We're talking about collaboration, okay? We're talking about managing information, data analytics. We're talking about communication. We're talking about creativity. We're talking about practical and functional skills. So these are the skills that are required in the digital era. So the question really should be, what are our children learning in the schools? What are the children learning in the schools? And this must concern us because two problems. In the pandemic, you have children sitting at home for 2 years. Well, and you have a more unequal society being created. So for those of you who are urbanized, for those of you who are listening, it may not be so bad for your children. For those of you who are lucky and your children are in international schools, I understand they have been allowed back to school. I don't know about the others. Well, maybe if they are in these traditional schools, the Kampala parents, the Green Hills of this world, they're having some kind of education and it's not so bad for them. But how about the child in the village? And that's where the majority of our people still are. What is happening? How do you even begin talking about these things? How do you talk about critical thinking to a culturally oppressed villager? How do you talk about collaboration? How do you talk about data analytics? How do I talk about practical and functional skills? But when you talk about practical and functional skills, they must be in the context of a digital environment, okay? You must talk about them in that context. And this is the dilemma for us, really. So this is where you begin talking about digital skills. And this is what you asked me to talk about. So think about this. And the question I want to share with you, dear Rotarians, is to what extent have our children been able to deal with these issues? One of the things that interests me a lot and I have raised it. We need to take it up in Rotary. Is the issue of culture. Our cultures are very important, but if we are not careful, the digital revolution. You see, in the third industrial revolution, if I go back, if I were to go back in this presentation, you would be able to see that I talked about the scientific revolution introducing imperialism. So you have an imperialism which is eroding our culture, but that is a form of literacy, which is very important to us. So when you talk about skills, what are the things that you want? One, they are what we call basic skills. Two, they are what we call intermediate skills. And three, they are what we call advanced skills. So at the very basic level, I wish somebody should mute. Maureen, can you mute? You want people to be able to be digitally literate, to create professional online profiles, to do word processing. Remember, I talked about reading and writing. So now we're talking about word processing as the way of writing. Okay, to use email, to have e-safety. I talked about e-safety. So how do you manage your privacy settings? How do you use keyboards and touch screens? For very many of you who have young kids, when they touch your phone, they can do crazy things with it, which you cannot do if you are like me, born before computers. So that is where the world is now. In the next slide, I'll be talking about the bigger problem, which is the digital divide. So for the kids who are urbanized, the kids who are probably from a well-to-do family, a middle-class family, these things you are being able to provide for your kids. But beyond that, when you talk about intermediate skills, what else can we talk about? Digital marketing, graphic design, desktop publishing. Those are the new skills. Remember, in the old context, we are talking about skills to do with craftsmanship as being literacy. So those are the intermediate skills. But then there's a higher level where we talk about artificial intelligence. That is big data, not big data. That is big data. Digital entrepreneurship, cyber security. I have talked about the Internet of Things. We talk about virtual reality. All these things are advanced skills. And you have some kids who are being introduced to these things. But let me focus on just one, and you will understand, because when I talk about it, it may be a bit abstract. Let me focus on digital entrepreneurship. When you talk about entrepreneurship today, and you cannot use your WhatsApp to create a business account, you cannot use Instagram to sell your products, you cannot use Facebook. Interestingly, when we had the election the other time, we told this point in Facebook that we didn't need them, which is very unfortunate. I don't want to go into that direction. But the young people use Facebook, they use Instagram, they use WhatsApp, they use these TikToks and so forth to communicate and to do business. Okay, so that's a new way of life. So when you talk about an Internet of Things, you are talking about a very, very connected world. So a lot of us are not part of that connected world. And I guess that is where our big problem lies. So how are we going to deal with these issues? So this is what you asked me to talk about. And I can only talk about in terms of saying, let us ask ourselves, to what extent is the curricula in the schools enabling our children to be able to do these things, to be able to do word processing, to be able to use an Excel sheet. I worked with a school called Matt Abacus, as you were told. and we teach professional programs. So when we teach professional programs, all our exams have now moved to what we call computer-based exams. And you need to sit behind a computer and do the exam. Now, the exam may involve you using a word processor, using an Excel sheet. For a long time, we have been struggling with pass rates. For about 1.5 years, 2 years, we have been struggling with pass rates because for us to have what we call a platinum status, we must have a 75% pass rates for the ACCA professional exams. Now, when you get into that lab, the first thing you will notice is your students do not have dexterity in word processing. They do not have dexterity in manipulating that Excel sheet. So what happens then? They cannot do an exam and finish it. But we're talking about Generation Z, and these Generation Z people should be able to have those skills at fingertips without thinking. Okay, so yes, when I was growing up, it was very uppity to have a post office box and to have a telephone in the home. Those things now, if they are in the laptop, they are in your hand, in your phone. So a phone is no longer something that is a luxury. It is a way of life. And that is where the basic skills begin. That's when you move to intermediate skills, and that's when you move to advanced skills. So this is the big problem for us. And which brings me to the last slide for this presentation today, which is where we are now. We are at the risk of what is now called a digital divide. All the things I've talked about, they have happened in advanced countries. But what is happening to us here? And I can begin by talking about this from the point of culture. Okay, I've told you about the problem of culture. And when you talk about culture, you are talking about family background, income, and education. If you in social sciences, we talk of lucky spams. If you are not a lucky spam, you are probably from a very poor family background. So you are incapacitated in terms of income and education. I don't know if you can see, that is where I am coming from, and I'm going to go around this way. So in terms of your family background, are you a lucky spam that you were able to be born where there was electricity and running water? And eventually, if you were born today, you are able to be born, and the next thing you have in your hand is a PS5 player. When we talk about ethnicity and language, if you are non-English speaking, you are a problem. So English has become the world's lingua franca. It's the language of business. So we all must speak English now, whether we want or not. But does that mean that we lose our ethnicity? Does that mean that we give up our culture? Does that mean that we are ashamed of our cultures? Does that mean that we stop belonging to our clans? Does that mean that we can marry members from our clan? What does that mean? So that is part of the problem of culture and the imperialism of the digital age, the imperialism of the scientific age, that people have become ashamed of what they are. Should we be ashamed of what we are? My answer is no, we should not be ashamed. Google has come up with projects that translate the data that they are holding into local languages. So today you have Google in Luganda, Kinyarwanda, Kiswahili. I don't know which other languages we have in Uganda, but these are things that are very important to us. And why you see, what is going to happen is that there is a cultural appropriation taking place. That for us, if we are refusing these things, then the people in Google will claim them. So they will claim a Ruombo and somebody will patent a Ruombo. So how will you say that a Ruombo is an African dish? Interestingly, for us, what we are promoting is a Rolex. which is a very unhealthy piece of food. So that is the cultural issue there. Now, when you talk about approach, we have with the old people who are technophobes, okay? And then we lack of motivation or objective. What's our big idea on technology as a country? Why do you impose the kinds of taxes that we're imposing on access to technology? A 12% excise duty on data, I think that's a very big problem. You're already disadvantaged digitally. So why do you widen the divide? In what we call the Benelux countries, they have added another human right, and that is the access to internet. It is now a human right in Norway, Finland, the Netherlands. So you can see here we are still saying we want to collect taxes, so we will tax those people who use data. Is that not an anachronism? Geographically, okay, we talk about rural versus urban, suburban. I have talked about this. We talk about underdeveloped nations versus first world countries. So geographically, we are disadvantaged. So you can't, if you are on the wrong side of the digital divide, my point is that then you are probably deficient in digital literacy. Economics, when you talk about economics, and very interesting. Before the pandemic, the last time I traveled, I think I was in London, and I went into the supermarket. So after I had picked up all these goods, I went to the checkout counter. And guess what? The checkout assistant has disappeared. That person has been replaced by a machine. I don't know if they have enough. They have labor shortages there now. But at that time, they used to have a supervisor who could show you how to check yourself out and pay. Now, one of the things that is happening with the digital divide is that even physical money is disappearing. Okay, so when I was there, to see people with money, they probably had to be Africans. So they were not surprised to see that I had this problem using the counter. Oh dear, I seem to have lost that. I need to get back to that screen. Okay, so let me finish off. So then you move from geographical to the economic. Lack of international investment and funding in poor countries, poverty, issues of affordability. Again, I've talked about underdeveloped nations versus first world countries. So we are at a disadvantage. Then social. I've talked about literacy skills already. So you know what I mean by literacy skills. And I gave you the 4 aspects of literacy. Okay, then we'll talk about people with disabilities versus people who are fit. Then we'll talk about people who are old versus the young. So there are social challenges. So this is the digital divide. So as we go through this week, we really need to think about these 5 issues of the digital divide that keep us away from being digitally literate in a world that is moving to the 5th industrial revolution. So these are questions that should occupy us as Rotarians. What can we do? What can we do, especially in this time of the pandemic, for the girl child who is at risk of getting pregnant at the age of 11, the age of 12, who is sitting in the village for 2 years not going to school? We should be concerned. We should be asking these questions, and we should be doing something. So it's not just about digital literacy, but it also means a lot for whether we shall be a prosperous nation tomorrow or we shall continue being a poor nation tomorrow. I thank you so much for listening to me. That's all I had for you. And over to you, Mr. President. Thank you for having me.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Sejaka. That has been extremely insightful. I'm your moderator, ladies and gentlemen, James Onyoin, and I will now ask members. We have only 5 minutes for questions and answers, so it is fairly short. The good thing, Professor has given a very elaborate presentation, so we don't expect a lot of questions. So I will just take hands which are raised. To make it easier, even if you have written it in the chat, just raise your hand. I think it will be easier. Can we start with Esther Owor? Let's take your question or comment.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Professor, for this powerful presentation. I cannot agree with you anymore. You have addressed the key issue. I have given you a side chart because what you have talked about, which is the core of our problem, is culture. And culture is actually recognized by the UNESCO. So what we must do is we must tweak around there, and we shall do exactly what China did, exactly what Singapore did, exactly what other countries have done. When you're dealing with an economy is localized to Uganda, and then you can relate internationally when you have established the facts in Uganda and have gotten it right. Sir, I request to meet you and share with you this. This is Esther from Rotary Club of Kampala, but thank you so much, sir. Thank you very much. Mine was a compliment.
Okay, thank you, Esther. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you, Esther. Just give your contact details to Professor if you haven't. Can we take the questions from CPA Frederick Kibedi?
Thank you so much, Moderator James. Professor, thank you so much for this very mind-tickling presentation that you have done. I have one question for you, Professor. Do you think now is the time for us to demonstrate to government in a digital manner the effects of having policies that take us in a different direction? Because it doesn't look like government has ears. I can give you an example. They closed Facebook, but police and other agencies of government keep on advertising and giving their Facebook details as a followers on Facebook. So you ask yourself, is there misnomer somewhere? Is there something we need to do to start speaking in a language that our leaders understand and therefore stop proposing or putting across policies that take us backward?
Thank you very much. But let's take also the third question. I think we have another. Let me just see another hand up by Goloba Edward.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Professor Samuel Sejaka, for another mind-churning presentation within the week of the truth. About Facebook, there's something you reminded me of. These young men and women are actually using Facebook, like architecture students use it to keep their work, to do presentations. We usually only use maybe 0.5% of what these platforms can offer. So when you have government closing down some of these things, I think a lot of the time the way they do their things is a bit of principle of duality and a bit, I think, short-sighted and unfair to the much younger generation. Because for them, they have so much use for them. Thank you very much. And thank you. Opened our minds to the digital age more. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much for that question. Can we have another last one, and then Professor will just respond to those who are signed up. Olivia, your hand was up. Hello, Sylvia. Can you go ahead, Sylvia? We have so many people with you there. Yeah, I think there's a problem. I think, Professor, you go for those comments and questions because we now have just 2 minutes for you to wind up, and I put it back to the President.
Okay, thank you very much. Esther, thank you. I have given you my number. Yes, and the issue of culture should not be taken lightly, because you see what happens when you speak in terms of the scientific revolution. There is a kind of imperialism that takes place, and that takes away our cultures and that takes away our identities. I remember going to the University of Maryland to visit my daughter, and my daughter is called Namugai. So the professor there welcomed me and said, "Welcome, Mr. Namugai." So I had a problem explaining that in my culture, we give names starting with N to girls, and that was not my name. So there is an appropriation of our culture taking place. So that's very important, Esther. Thank you. Fred, I don't know how. Of course, in Rotary, you don't want. We have agreed. We don't want. We are non-political, but I think we need to do advocacy. I think we don't need to be political. We need to do advocacy and engage government that some of the policies, the government may benefit in the short term in terms of collecting some revenue, but in the long term, there are very, very serious consequences of not investing in technology and not making these technologies available to the young people, because our kids will be disadvantaged. So my former president, Fred, I do agree with you. How can we do advocacy and ensure that no one is left behind in the digital age? So I agree with you. The last one was from Edward. Edward, in economics, what you're talking about really is what we call moral hazard. So you have digital dinosaurs in charge of digital whiz kids. What happens? You have a problem. I don't even want to go there. So you have a clash of generations. I do not know. But even the people who have been chosen to take us to the fourth industrial revolution, I don't know. They are digital dinosaurs. I don't know if they know anything about these technologies. So that is a big problem for us. I think we've got to get people who are digitally savvy into some of these spaces to help us move the country forward. So I do agree with you. There are lots of applications out there in anything. Even the professions that we practice, they have changed so much because of the fifth industrial revolution, because of artificial intelligence, because of machine learning, that the way things are done must be reconsidered. It's just amazing. It's just amazing how intelligent these machines are. By the way, have you realized that nobody now talks about Africa becoming the next industrial hub of the world? Because you see, the third and fourth digital revolutions or scientific revolutions led to a situation whereby a lot of production does not need human labor. So we were expecting that because we have a population dividend, a lot of the manufacturing would be moving from Asia as it changed to move to Africa. Now that is not going to happen. So we really have a big problem. So that industrial revolution may also bypass us. So we've not gone through that second and third industrial revolution properly. So where are we now? We have jumped to the fifth industrial revolution. So we have a very big problem and we need to wake up. Africa, we need to wake up. So thank you, Dr. James Onyen, for having me, and thank you, Rotarians, for those questions. The presentation, I will send it to Irene. She will then share it with you. Please bear with me. I do not usually want to give the presentation before. Otherwise, you have no reason for coming. I thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Sejaka. Wow. So over to you, President. There was a hand up by Dr. Kasenene, but I will ask him to put the question in the chat room and we'll put it to Professor Sejaka. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Let me be clapping for him as the.
Thank you very much. AG Dr. James, may I invite you, PE, please, to carry us forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Professor Sejaka, you've really taken us through the ocean of literacy in our society throughout human history. up to our present age. You have pointed us very vividly to what digital literacy means to us today and what it actually means for our society and why we should embrace it in our schools and communities. My prayer is that your presentation should inspire us to confront the digital divide and promote digital literacy as a service to humanity. Thank you. Thank you so much for such a clear, concise, and elaborate presentation. God bless you.
Thank you very much, sir.
All right, in the interest of time, if can I share with you the statistics? Am I audible?
Yes, you
Right
are.
and clear. Go ahead.
All right. Before I share statistics, I've been joking with my colleagues that Wi-Fi is a human right, and the presentation has just justified that statement. Without any further ado, we had 196 participants, 45 Rotary clubs, 1 Rotary club, and 4 guests. I'll start with the guests. Mr. Joachim Bivuli, Madam Fiona Sima, our usual guest, Evelyn Ogwal, and one Miss T. I think Miss T is teeing us off the list of the guest list. The Rotary clubs are follows. Bweyogera Nambole, Bwebaja, Bulova, Entebbe, Nansana, Sonde, Sunrise, Port Bell, Ntinda, Kampala, Kivuli, Makindye, Nsanji, Kampala, Alibag, Namasuba, Muyenga, Sunset, Seguku, Najera, Rubaga, Lakeview, Kampala, Mpala, Kampala Morning Stars, Kampala, Luboa, Kololo, Kampala Central, Kiwatule, Bukoto, Kasangati, Kampala South, Rotary E-Club of Uganda Global, Maisha, Bulindo, Mukono Central, Katang, Muyenga, Chadondo, Kampala Springs, Kampala South, Kampala West, Makindye West, Ntinda Metropolitan, Bulova, Kampala North, Natete, Kampala East, Lugogo, Mango Tree, Mbale, and Kawempe. The club of the day was Sunrise. If I haven't mentioned your club, please input the name in the chat group and we'll include it in the statistics. The Rotary Club president was Nakawa Moobs. I submit.
Thank you very much, Sergeant at Arms, Rotarian Works, Stephen Wakasenza. As I prepare to invite our own Rotarian Ruth Kanyaruju to give us the final toast, I would like to again amplify the voice of the daybreakers to all you are Rotarians that wake up every Thursday morning to break the day with us. Thank you so very much. And for you, the morning crew, for warming up the room ever and ever, we appreciate. But allow me in just a few microseconds, appreciate all our district leaders, our district officials, led by you, DGN Francisco Semanga. Thank you so much for making time to be with us. Past Assistant Governors, thank you so much. Changemaker Assistant Governors, led by none other than Dean of Ages, Kaitarama, thank you so much. And to you, my comrades, Changemaker Presidents, what a joy it is to always host you. And when I get to our international partners, wow, my friend CP Sam calls them coinmates, but because we share the same currency, but you are our partners, all the Rotarians from District 9214, led by VCC, Jaja Mzungu, and your president of president, my friend Donna. Thank you so much for giving us this overwhelming support ever. We don't take nothing for granted, but really appreciate you. My friend Rotarian Ruth Kanyaruju, kindly give us the final toast.
Thank you, Rotarian President. I'm so happy and excited about these mind-jogging presentations we've had, and for such informative presentation and everything that you've done, President. Fellow Rotarian, join me to toast to Rotary International.
Rotary the world over. Thank you so much, friends. God bless you
The world over.
and make you
over.
a blessing.
World over.
Rotary is also over.
I'll make
Rotary
for
world
that one.
over.